fine. How are you?
I'm doing well. So tell me who you are.
I am Janie Jones, and I'm the author of the Arkansas Hitchhike Killer, James Waybern Red Hall.
James Hall.
Yes.
Tell me about Mr. Hall.
Well, most people called him Red. He is one of our lesser known serial killers. In fact, when I started to write about him, there was nothing online, absolutely nothing. At the time, I was writing articles for AY Magazine, true crime articles for AY Magazine, which is based in Little Rock. And a friend of mine, Wanda McNinch, kept saying, "You need to write about Red Hall." And I said, "Who's Red Hall?" And she couldn't really tell me a lot, but she remembered she was 10 years old when he was in the news a lot here in Arkansas. Well, she was 10 years old in 1945, so it narrowed it down a little bit. I knew his name, I knew the location, which was Enola in Faulkner County, Arkansas, and I knew the time frame, 1945. I was lucky enough to go online and find a man named Patterson Smith in New Jersey. He has a vast collection of newspaper articles, magazine articles, books about true crime.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote to him and I told him what little I knew. And he found 5 old detective magazines from the 40s and 50s about this case. 5 articles, I think it was. And that was enough for me to write a 2-part article for the magazine. And then he started popping up online a little bit after my article came out. And then I decided to take a break from the magazine for a little while. And I was looking for something to write, a subject for a book.
Mm-hmm.
And it was my husband who suggested, "Well, why don't you write about Red Hall?" And I thought,
So
yeah.
he knew about the story.
Yes.
Okay.
But then the problem with writing a book, you're going to have a lot more information
Mm-hmm.
than what you get for a magazine article. That's when I really started the in-depth research. And I was able to talk to people who actually knew him. They are no longer with us because I wrote this over a period of years because life interferes when you're trying to do something like this.
Sure.
So I would work on it for maybe 6 months at a time and then 6 months off. But I was able to talk to a lot of people from that era who knew him.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really eye-opening. And then, I got a lot of information from old newspaper articles by a man named Joe Wurgis. And he was quite a character, but he was an excellent newspaperman. He was on the crime beat, and his newspaper articles were invaluable when I was doing the research. Um, he was there for well, I don't want to give too much away about the book, uh, but he was there throughout the whole investigation and resolution. So I got a lot of information from Joe Wurgis's newspaper articles and the court transcript, the trial transcript. That was also very, very helpful. So that's how I put it together.
So tell me a little bit about Mr. Hall's crimes that he committed.
Well, I call him the Hitchhike Killer because most of his victims were people who picked him up when he would travel around the country. He liked to go hitchhiking.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes he rode the rails, so sometimes he was on trains, but he would go off on these extended trips, usually out west. It seemed like he had a particularly favorite route where he would go through Oklahoma, up through Kansas, out to California, down through Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and then back to Arkansas, where he was working as a cab driver in Little Rock. And the cab company kept him employed because they said he was such a good driver, even though he would up and leave for like 2 weeks at a time. He would always come back and they would always rehire him. Um, but yes, most of his victims were people who picked him up. Um, but what the way the whole thing culminated was with some murders that he committed beginning in 1944, with the disappearance first of his second wife, Fayreen.
Mhm.
Her family reported her missing and went to the Little Rock Police Department for help. They immediately started looking at Red because he was her husband, of course, and but he was slippery. He was a very slippery guy. He could talk his way out of situations, and he said that, oh, she just left him. She left him and went to California, and they really didn't have anything to go on.
Mhm.
The other thing, though, was beginning in January 1945, he went on sort of a spree killing, which was unusual for him. And I've wondered sometimes if the fact that he killed somebody he knew personally, Fayreen, may have even loved at some point, it may have just set him loose on this spree. And he killed, let's see, there was Mr. Carl Hamilton in January 1945, Mr. E.C. Adams, who was from Humboldt, Kansas. That was in early February. Doyle Mulheron, he was a truck driver. And let's see, oh, J.D. Newcomb, he was a boiler inspector. They all picked Red up, and he killed every one of them. Now, when those murders started to happen, the state police, the Arkansas State Police, were called in. And so they were working on the hitchhike related murders, while the Little Rock Police Department, they were looking at him trying to find his wife. And this is one of those situations where different law enforcement agencies worked so well together. It just kind of came together between the Little Rock Police Department and the Arkansas State Police. And they were able to zero in on him. Um, and his ultimate, the thing that finally cracked the case was a phone tip. And I won't go into any more about that. I don't want to spoil the book for you, but it ended up with his capture. And then after his capture, um, he started, I tell you, once they got him talking, he wouldn't shut up. Um, so he confessed. And at one point, he said there were more, let's see, it was closer to 24 victims than what they had counted up. Now, he killed 11 people in 1938 alone, and then those 5 in Arkansas. So right there, you've got 16. Then he confessed to one in Salina, his first murder, which he committed in 1938. Um, so he just started confessing to all these crimes, and there were a lot of murders that looked like his work. And when this became known to other law enforcement agencies in other states, they were anxious to see if they could close the books on some of their unsolved murders. Now, here's the thing, it happened in 1945, is when he was captured, and the World War II was coming to an end. So the war was taking up all the news space in the newspapers. And that's why a lot of people have never heard of Red Hall. The war stole his thunder, you might say. Um, and as a matter of fact, the war in Europe ended on the day that he was one of the days he was on trial. So that's why he sort of got lost to history.
What do you think his motivations were? I understand that Mr. Hall was dishonorably discharged from the Navy, so there obviously was some sort of mental issue there. But what do you think his motivation for killing these people were?
That's what makes him so interesting. He's not like other serial killers who kill usually for sexual gratification or something like that, or fetishes. He had a head injury when he was about 12 or 13, and I think that had a lot to do with it. He had been it knocked him out, and he was unconscious for quite a while. And then they said that he was never the same after that. Um, he was sick from the head injury for weeks, and I think it affected maybe his frontal lobe, which has to do with inhibitions, and it helps you control your emotions. Um, and that may have triggered something. He also came from a difficult family life. His father was very strict and to the point of being very cruel. So you put those two things together, um, because he never got much out of any of these hitchhike robberies. He would take things, but I don't think he ever got more than $126
Oh,
from a
wow.
robbery of one of his victims. It was usually he would steal cigarettes, that they had boxes of cigarettes. He would steal the weirdest things, clocks, uh, razors, um, anything that he thought he might be able to sell. And back then, apparently, you could just be walking down the street carrying an object, and somebody would come up and say, "Ah, is that for sale?" And he would sell these things. So he did not do it for financial gain, really. That was just more like an afterthought, I think. Um, Nobody will ever really know.
Yeah. Was there, well, first of all, what was the primary means that he used to kill these individuals? Was it a gun? Was it a knife? Did he strangle people?
Okay, usually guns. He would usually shoot them. He did beat some people. Um, his second wife, Irene, he beat her to death. Um, and his first victim, I think when it came to victims, they were usually men, but he did kill, I know, at least two women. And interestingly, he beat the two women to death,
Hmm.
but he used guns on the men.
Yeah.
I guess he thought that gave him an advantage, although Red was a big guy and he was strong. He was he would have been a great boxer. Um, Not long before his capture, he beat up a guy behind a bar in Little Rock, and he was arrested for that. But that poor man was in the hospital for ages. He was in there for weeks. He was almost killed, and that was a beating.
During his trial, do you know if he ever expressed any remorse for any of the actions that he had taken?
Well, he was very religious. I can't say that he really expressed remorse. Um, he seemed to be more concerned that he was bringing shame on his family, especially his father. Oddly enough, his father, who was abusive, was somebody that Red seemed to want to please, um, and make sure that people knew his family was a good family.
And where can we find your book?
Um, Arcadia Publishing was the one who published the book under their History Press imprint. And you can go to Arcadia's website, buy books there, or any online bookstore like Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any brick and mortar stores like Barnes and Noble, and some Books a Millions. Just, I think you can find it pretty easily online.
Thank you very much for speaking with me today. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.